Greetings and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive series, I'm going to explore the astrology, the big picture of March 2024. It's an incredibly powerful month. It begins with the Sun and Jupiter in a quite beautiful alliance, one of the luckiest in astrology. But we also have a connection between the North Node and Chiron on the 5th, which is exact. But those two are actually in touch for the whole of the month within 3 degrees. We have the second supermoon in succession on the 10th, which forges a really exciting link to Uranus. But then on the 20th, we have the spring equinox and the start of the Western tropical astrological year. If you're new to my channel, it's great to have your company. This is very much a community. If you have any thoughts, please share them. I interact with each one. If you're a returning visitor, thank you so much for your company. Your likes, comments, shares and subscriptions are truly appreciated. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Then you'll get an alert every time I drop a new video. So on the screen now, I'm sharing the event chart right at the start of this month. We can see that there's a lineup, a stellium of energy in the sign of Pisces, the Sun, Mercury, Saturn and Neptune. But the critical thing is the Sun and Saturn are very close together as we come into this new month. If you recall, they peaked in an absolute alliance on the 28th of February. But the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, and this is a critical degree in astrology because it gives us a balance between the thrust of the Sun and the more receptive energies of the Moon. It's at 10 degrees in Capricorn. But that's very helpful in the sense that it forges a great alliance to Jupiter. Jupiter in the sign of Taurus can be very fortunate around financial matters. Of course, for the last 4 months of last year, Jupiter was in a retrograde. And we've had the rather unsettling energies of Uranus in the sign of Taurus, which in some ways has been counteracting the more positive vibe of Jupiter. Ironically, by the end of this month, the last 2 days, they actually start to come together and are going to peak on the 21st of April next month. But that midpoint at 10 degrees Capricorn just tells us that we need to stay in touch with our worldly interactions, anything to do with our professional situation, our goals and ambitions. But what that Pisces energy is asking us to think about is how things feel. And because Saturn is so close to the Sun, even though the Sun is forging that gorgeous, potentially very lucky link to Jupiter, along with that midpoint, what Saturn is saying is that we must keep our feet on the ground. Now, in fact, the Sun and Jupiter are in touch within 3 degrees through the first 4 days of this month. The sextile between the Sun and Jupiter is very enabling. But the Sun in the sign of Pisces is very reflective. I think what we're being asked to do here as we come into this month is not only be realistic with Saturn's help, and of course the midpoint in Capricorn governed by Saturn, but we're also asked in some ways to be in touch with our spirit, how we feel about things, our instincts. So whether we are grappling with a relationship matter to do with our physical vitality or our finances, just staying in touch with how it feels is such an important thing. Now, I mentioned in the introduction that the North Node and Chiron are within 3 degrees of each other for the whole of this month. That does, of course, become exact on the 5th. But it's worth noting that Venus is forging a beautiful link to both of them as we start this month, and that's something to be mindful of. But that connection is very much to do with our sense of identity. So whatever sign you have Chiron in yourself natally, we can still all reflect on this conjunction between the two in terms of our overall experience. Obviously, the North Node is the collective direction of travel, which is asking us in some ways to reinvigorate our whole approach. And Chiron, the wounded healer in the sign of Aries, is wanting us to get in touch with our value as an individual, but also have more confidence to do things that are good for us, not just be rooted in necessarily always looking for approval. So that's an interesting set of themes that we can all grapple with. Now in week 2, the Sun starts to move into a very enabling link with Uranus. So as much as Uranus has been disruptive at times over the last 6 years in the sign of Taurus, where it's not happy, it's in full. And of course Uranus rules the sign of Aquarius, which is a fixed sign. Taurus is a fixed sign too. But whereas Aquarius has that progressive side to it, Taurus really appreciates continuity. So if we've resisted change, it may have actually happened even in spite of that resistance. But the good news here is, again, we can use the experience of the Sun in Pisces, all the knowledge we've gained over the previous 12 months as it's journeyed through each of the 12 signs, to think about how we may just adapt a little bit. The sign of Pisces is very much to do with flexibility. It's a mutable sign. So those instincts that come from Pisces can still be directed in a constructive way. And again, if we're really tuning into how we feel about things, that could see us do something that's more innovative, fresh, or reviving, that can be actually very positive for us. And on the 10th, we have the second successive super new moon. Essentially, this is not an astronomical theme, it's actually an astrological theme. It seems that the moon can be more powerful because it is nearer to us physically. But it's also forging a terrific link with Uranus. Because the moon's in the mix, what we have basically is a GEMINI. The sun and the moon are together, but the sun magnifies the energy of the moon. Now, of course, the moon itself is mightily powerful and also governs the second decan of the sign of Pisces. But in fact, this new moon occurs just 17 minutes into the third decan of Pisces, at 20 degrees and 17. So it's very much in touch with the Martian energy of Scorpio, the third of the water triplicities. So having the sun and the moon, but angling towards Uranus in that constructive way in the sextile, but with a little bit more feist there because Mars is in the mix. So that's pushing us in some ways to listen to our hunches, but also take action, go with them. So over the following month, whether it is to do with working at our emotional, psychological and spiritual worlds, whatever ideas we generate, Uranus and that Mars third decan energy are really saying, look, change can be as good as a rest. Of course, it's not always good to change things just for the sake of it, and that takes us back to that point about things feeling right. Now, Mercury is going to be moving into the sign of Aries, and that's also on the 10th, and that angles to Pluto as well. When Mercury and Pluto are in a constructive angle, it gives us awesome powers of penetrative understanding. But Mercury moving into Aries is good because Mercury's not that happy in the sign of Pisces. It's watery and Mercury thrives on a bit of logic. So we pump a little bit of fire and oxygen into the mix, then Mercury's really enabled. So if we're wanting to start things afresh, the link with Pluto suggests our perceptions can be sharper and we can want to actually take action. But ironically, on the 11th, Venus replaces Mercury. Now, Venus likes being in Pisces, unlike Mercury. It's exalted here. And this is a great opportunity to feel things. But the thing is that Venus is going to be linking up to Saturn. Venus also forges a glorious link to Jupiter, and that happens in week 3, and that's one of the luckiest of all planetary alliances because Venus will be exalted, Jupiter's pretty comfortable in the sign of Taurus. These are the two planets of fortune, Jupiter the greater and Venus the lesser benefics in traditional astrology. So it may be that Venus in the 12th house and its instincts, even its romance, but its ability to feel things and be very soothing, whether it is around finance or relationships, can be a real asset, except that it does also meet Saturn, and that's going to peak on the 21st. If there is a relationship in your world that isn't working, it really is going to be seriously tested at this point, because what Venus in the 12th house is asking us to think about are the issues of trust, faithfulness, sincerity. This is collectively where we can all try to understand the more spiritual dimension of our connections to others. So the coldness, the cool detachment of Saturn can highlight a relationship where there is a lack of those qualities. And it could, in a relationship that's really bumped along the bottom, prove to be somewhat terminal. But the 20th, the spring equinox, a really exciting point in the whole year, because this kickstarts that whole Western tropical calendar. But this year it forges a brilliant link to the moon in Leo, so more fire, but also the sun is linking, like Mercury did, to Pluto. So the sun and Pluto is a very potent mix. This is an awesome opportunity to start new things. If we have had some things naturally come to the close with all that Piscean energy, whether it's some interest, whether it's some friendships, a relationship, a job that we had, this is the chance to really go again. And you can go again in the most dynamic way. But it is going to be important, to be honest, to be mindful of the ruler of the sign of Aries, because that's going to be moving into Pisces on the 22nd. So although we can be very single-minded, although we can set goals and ambitions and be determined to just action them in a very direct way, because Mars in the 12th house is going to make us much more aware of the psychological domain, but the Sun and Pluto in the 11th house, very much about how we connect to others, our network, our long-term aims, but also our higher principles. But the Sun smashing back into Aries is more about risk-taking. But its ruler is saying just a few days later, whoa, just be aware that there may be some things that still need to be resolved. This could be to do with past upsets, traumas, angers that are still lingering deep within us. In a more constructive way, Mars is great for any kind of subterranean work, whether it's a diver at sea, seriously, or someone who's very interested in perhaps forensic science, is trying to understand why things have happened, or even psychology itself. Mars here can be terrific for really probing deep, for sure. But the Sun does lose a little bit of drive and momentum between the 14th and the 19th when it aligns with Neptune, the co-ruler of the sign of Pisces, but one which can dissipate vitality. So we may find just before the spring equinox occurs that we may just need to rest a little bit, just collect our thoughts and not overextend ourselves. But once that spring equinox explodes into life, it really is a case of go, go, go. Now the 25th sees that lunar eclipse in the sign of Libra. If you recall, on the 14th of October 2023, we had the first in this series of the Libra solar eclipses. So this is a challenge really to what occurred then. Now obviously Libran energy is very much about relating. It can be about diplomacy, balance, also important around fairness, but also Libra, when it's not heard, can be very feisty because it's a cardinal sign, can demonstrate the energies of more like Aries. So it depends what's been playing out in your situation since then. But if you feel in a relationship context something hasn't been working so well, this is going to be a tender point, because the sign of Aries is about being very single-minded and singular in the way we go about things. So it's very much self-focused, whereas The sign of Libra is very much more consensual, collegiate, working together. It's about trying to find harmony. So if there is a lack of harmony, the fact that Pluto is informing the energy of this eclipse over the next 6 months suggests that if a relationship really isn't working for us in the way we want, we have an opportunity to transform it with Pluto's help, or it could make way. Now, as I mentioned before, there is going to be the start of that connection between Jupiter and Uranus. It builds up the last 2 days of this month within 3 degrees. It's actually going to go on through to the 5th of May. So it's a long transition, but that peak will be next month on the 21st. But you can see as this month begins, just to summarize, that midpoint at 0 degrees in Capricorn is asking us all to be businesslike, but at the same time, tune into the more feeling energy of Pisces, which is very strong at the start of the month. You can see the energies of Jupiter, but also Pluto are also very powerful right throughout March. And that's node conjunction with Chiron on the 5th, the North Node, is a seminal moment if we want to work on any issues to do with our identity. But to check out your deep dive, in-depth horoscope forecast for March, please see the link beneath this video. If you would like to ascend above your zodiac sign and understanding of that and embrace the power of more serious astrology, if you give me 3 pieces of birth data of time, date and place, I can prepare for you your life roadmap report. This is totally unique to you and will give you searing insights into the patterns that have played out in your life so far, but crucially a much more intimate understanding of how to work with those planetary energies in a more successful way future forwards. In my special package of 30% off, you can also get your 12 months forecast. That's the moving planets in the sky interacting with your unique celestial blueprint. Please see the link beneath this video for more. So Aries, as you come into March, so the Sun, Mercury, Saturn and Neptune are all actually in a very reflective part of your situation. But Venus and your ruler Mars are in the friendly 11th house, the sign of Aquarius. But the critical thing is on the first day of this month, the Sun and Jupiter forge an exact sextile. This is one of the luckiest influences in astrology, particularly for you because Jupiter's in the part of your scope to do with everyday money. But the Sun is very close to Saturn at the start of this month. It actually came into an exact conjunction on the 28th of February. And there may be a little bit of a lower vitality as you enter the month, or perhaps even a little bit of skepticism about how things will work out for you. But the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, a critical degree in astrology, is actually in the 10th house of your chart, the sign of Capricorn, at 10 degrees. And that's urging you, in its link to Jupiter, to seize the moment, to be as bold as possible. But there's no doubt about it. The Sun being close to Saturn can just blunt that little bit of self-belief. So very, very important that you do try to make progress. And the best way to do this is to appreciate that all the experiences you've had in your life, whether they've been good or bad, have given you a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom, but also a lot of experience. And you can use all that to guide your moves around some kind of financial or business or job application or situation. Now, all through this month, the North Node is going to be very close to Chiron in your sign, the wounded healer. But on the 5th, this aspect is absolutely exact. If there has been a part of your situation or a part of your life experience where you haven't always totally believed in your individual qualities and talents, this is a great chance to give yourself a personal relaunch. The North Node is very much about our collective direction of travel, our future orientation. So it's almost like coming to peace with some of the things that haven't worked for you. And because, not just with the Sun at the start of this month, but also with Venus aligning to Saturn as well, this could be a start of March this year where there may be some things that haven't gone quite as you want that could cause a little bit of disappointment, or see you struggling with some circumstances that may feel somewhat out of your control. But on the 10th, we have a supermoon, and it is in the sign of Pisces, but it's forging a delicious link to Uranus. Uranus, like Jupiter, is in the part of your situation to do with everyday resources, but also crucially self-worth. But with Mercury moving into your sign on the same day, this is a 12th house new moon that I think can be very good for you. It's asking you to listen to your instincts. That's when you're at your best, not when you're navel gazing and worrying about how things may play out. It's when you really go for it, because your instincts can be so powerful. But with on the 11th, Venus moving out of the friendly Aquarius and into the more reflective Pisces. Technically, Venus loves being in Pisces, and this could evoke in you a great nostalgia. Perhaps you'll be looking back on past experiences, maybe even feeling very sentimental. It could possibly bring someone from your past back into your situation. But in week 3, as Venus applies to Saturn, if you are in a weak relationship, be it a friendship with a colleague, or perhaps with a partner, it really could be tested. Venus combining with Saturn is really quite tested. So the 20th, with the spring equinox, this really is a particularly important time for you, especially because of that link to Pluto, because Pluto's in the part of your situation to do with how you connect to people, your long-term planning, your friendships, your alliances, and the higher motivations you have that go beyond just the physical or the more material plane. So something can really get you motoring from that spring equinox, and particularly as it forges a great link with the moon in your fellow fire sign of Leo. So you're really being primed up in an excellent way. And in fact, from the 22nd to the 27th could be really lucky for you. Someone could be very generous to you unexpectedly, or past efforts can pay off, particularly creatively, that could really absolutely delight you. But on the 22nd, it is also true that Mars, your ruler, dives deep, moving into Pisces, where it will be for 6 weeks. Mars in the 12th house can have a tendency to rake up anything from the past which we haven't quite sorted out. Sometimes we think we have. So your moods could be a little bit up and down, but the full moon, which is also a lunar eclipse, a micro moon, believe it or not, occurs on the 25th, and this too is feeding into the energy of Pluto in the guise of the moon in Libra, but also the sun in your sign in a very positive way. What I'm getting from this whole month in its totality, particularly as the sun will also align to Neptune from the 14th to the 19th, is that at moments in March, your energy could be a little bit on the low side. And you may feel that the headwinds against you are quite considerable, but actually threaded through all of this are enormous opportunities. But it's kind of saying, in a symbolic way, Aries, there are parts of your situation that haven't worked out that you need to be more accepting of, and really a little bit more philosophical, and free up your energy, your gaze, and your motivation to the things that can be exciting for your future. And if you keep pouring energy into something that didn't work the first time round, however much you feel it might be the right thing to do, there is a danger that you're going to dissipate the opportunity by trying to solve something that maybe isn't for your greater good. So you will need to use your physical and emotional and spiritual energies wisely this month. But once you get to the 20th, I really feel that you're going to be feeling a lot more optimistic. And Venus and Jupiter combining in that sextile is one of the luckiest in astrology. So there's a little bit of luck potentially at the start of the month and in week 3. But most of all, your physical vitality will really soar. And in the last 2 days of this month, as Jupiter and Uranus start to tighten up within 3 degrees, some unexpected but very positive financial news could come your way. So Taurus, as you begin March, the Sun, Mercury, Saturn and Neptune are all in your 11th house, very much to do with those future plans, your network, your friendships, but also your highest hopes. But the Sun is very, very close to Saturn. In fact, it was exactly conjunct Saturn on the 28th of February. And there may be something that you have invested a lot of yourself in, maybe a friendship, maybe an interest, and it could give you food for thought in this early part of the month. But equally, with the Sun forging that glorious link to Jupiter, if there's something that's still really exciting you, then it can pay dividends, particularly if you're closely involved in whatever future you're planning. So it's not just about having a good job or a good relationship. You need to feel creatively invested. I feel that is what Jupiter is saying to you. Now, the Sun and also Venus, your ruler, are going to ally to Saturn this month. If there are some people in your social circle who are not necessarily completely as committed to you as you would like, the cracks could show a little bit. But also with the nodal conjunction to Chiron, which becomes exact on the 5th, but essentially provides a backdrop for the whole of this month, you could find yourself asking some very deep and searching questions about the meaning of life and what you really want. And if there is some psychological stuff from your past that's still floating around, perhaps the new moon of the 10th, and it's linked to Uranus in your sign, is a provocation to perhaps look at something in a different and fresh light. Mercury, however, does move into your 12th house to join up with the node and also Chiron on the 10th. And perhaps that can start to see you maybe just stepping inside a little bit. Now, despite this, on the 11th, your ruler does move into the most sociable part of your chart. But in week 3, it is in that conjunction with Saturn, and it's exact on the 21st. But the 20th sees the spring equinox. That sees the Sun join up with Mercury and also the node and Chiron in your 12th house. So you can see how the transition's going. If you have been asking some questions about your longer term future, by the time we get to Mars moving into your 11th house on the 22nd and then the lunar eclipse on the 25th, the outcome of those two changes could mean that you can see that maybe you do need to realign some of your direction, but you might not quite have the strategy completely worked out. If so, try to go with it, because one of the things the eclipse will do is forge a very positive link to Pluto. Pluto right high in the most prominent part of your situation could see you thinking carefully about your professional involvements as well. There may be some kind of reset that you go through in the last phase of this month, but I think the genesis of it, if you like, is really there from the Sun's alliance with Saturn, as it was at the end of February, when slowly but surely you're thinking, am I quite on the right track? Am I hanging out with the right people? Am I motivated by the right things? So there can be some big questions this month. And although that super new moon, which occurs on the 10th, can be very uplifting, and you do have the link between Venus and Jupiter, which goes from the 22nd to the 27th, which can be good financially and also very good socially, I feel that Saturn all the time keeps asking those searching questions. And then even the spring equinox, with its link also to Pluto, once more is just asking you, am I on the right track around my work as well? So this month can definitely pose some questions, but it can also see some major breakthroughs if you're very much in touch with the process, you're very invested, it all feels right. Things could actually make progress in a very solid way. And rather than experience resistance, you can see actually bricks being put into place in the wall, which can give you a firmer foundation from which to work from. But certainly by the end of the month, if you do find yourself wanting to retreat a little bit, have some time out, perhaps even consider some new approaches to food, diet, nutrition and exercise, just take that in your stride, because the last 2 days of this month start to see the build up of the conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus in your sign, which will become exact on the 21st of April. But it's going on right through to the early part of June. So maybe something you've been working towards has been for the right motivations in some ways, but if it's not really exciting and gripping you as it might, maybe this month requires some kind of rethink or reset. But if you're on the right track, you're going to start to see some exciting evidence by the end of the month. So Gemini, as March begins, so the Sun, Mercury, Saturn and Neptune are all in your 10th house. This is where we connect with the wider world. It's how people perceive us. It's the sunlight part of our situations. Can be to do with goals, ambitions, success, but can also be to do with our responsibilities and where people want to depend upon us, you know, in any kind of leadership sense, whether it's within our families, within some kind of professional setting, or even locally. And right at the start of this month, the Sun is just edging away from a connection it had to the strict energies of Saturn on the 28th of February. So if as February came to a close, there was some kind of reshaping around your professional situation, which may have tightened up your responsibilities or seemed a bit onerous, or you decided to step up in some kind of way, it wouldn't be a surprise. But also on that day, Jupiter, the planet of fortune, but in your 12th house, which is really expressing or helping you to express its more spiritual merits, is forging a beautiful link to the Sun, one of the luckiest. So when it comes to those professional hopes, it's a good thing to really listen to your instincts. And of course, because you're an air sign, you're very logical, so stay in touch with those instincts. Now, all through this month, the North Node, retreating as it does, is within reach of Chiron, the wounded healer. Now, they meet exactly on the 5th, but in your sector of friendship and the collective. If you have been someone who, despite your reputation of being very chatty and interactive, hasn't always found it so easy to connect to like-minded people, this can be a very healing aspect indeed. Also in week 2, Uranus, like Jupiter, in your 12th house, and has been an unsettling influence at times, suggests that there could be some kind of information that comes your way and something you discover which can be beneficial to approaching a professional matter with a fresh pair of eyes. But the super new moon, as I mentioned before, embraces that energy of Uranus, but does see Mercury move into your friendship sector. And that really is the start of a paradox of this month, because on the 11th, Venus replaces Mercury in Pisces. So your way of approaching professional relationships, or the strength of the ties you have, can really help by Venus. But Venus is going to be aligning with Saturn on the 21st. And that could mean that in a romantic context, you and a partner take that next step of commitment or make a decision to do with a property matter. But equally, it may mean that someone you've got on well with in the past could be a little bit cool. And because the Sun is also going to be applying to Neptune from the 14th to the 19th, if there are pressures at work and you're not necessarily getting the support you need, it could feel a little bit draining. The good news, however, is that Venus and Jupiter are the two planets of fortune in traditional astrology, and they do forge a very positive link from the 22nd to the 27th. So if you can keep the lines of communication open at work, even if you find some of the people you deal with a little tricky, it really can come back to you and it can give you some credit in the bank. It goes beyond just knowledge and your proficiency. Whether people really warm and relate to you is important too. But then on the 20th we have the spring equinox. But what makes this one so incredibly powerful is that, one, it links beautifully with the moon in Leo, but two, and perhaps most importantly, it links perfectly with Pluto. So Pluto, in the part of your situation that's to do with discovery, new experiences, travel, publishing, higher knowledge, widening your horizons, being embracing that part of yourself that's very independent, But in this context, it's asking you also to be very searching in terms of your inner truth. And because the Sun with the spring equinox moves to join with Mercury in your sector of friendship, one area that you're going to be looking for closer connections is around your network, around your alliances, and some important people can come into your situation. Now, Mars does move to go into the sign of Pisces on the 22nd. You could argue, because Mars rules the sign of Scorpio, that it works in Pisces because that's a water sign. Mars in Pisces for me is very, very good if we're using its drive and its desire around something that is subterranean in some way. So if we're using its desire to become more self-aware, or to embrace personal development, or read books on psychology, or watch videos on self-help, Mars can be very helpful. But what it can do for you personally is just heighten your determination and give you more self-belief. The full moon of the 25th, the lunar eclipse, however, also links very well to Pluto, but I think for you personally, it's kind of saying you may have to make some key decisions about your time management. Don't be surprised if more than one person seems to want to spend time with you. And it could be people who are quite new to you. These are people who are others who are interested in learning new things. And there could be a connection that's really quite important. Someone you encounter and get to know may help you in some way around your personal expression, or just to feel that you're part of some kind of fraternity. So as much as all those professional possibilities are there early in the month, or some of them could be a bit onerous, Mars coming along certainly can bolster your physical energy and your dynamism. But as the month comes to a close, it's your longer term future, your alliance, the things that really inspire you, that becomes more important than just outright success, status, and progress in a goal orientated way. So a much, much more spiritual dimension sweeps into your chart in the last phase of this month, and that's going to prove very interesting. Whatever it is that interests you, whether it's your relationships, your hobbies, the causes that you're invested in, or it's your social situation, it is looking very, very exciting towards the end of this month. So Cancer, as you make your way into March 2024, I think I can safely say that change is in the air. Or is it? Because as much as you may want to shake things up in some way and be more spontaneous, as you came to the end of February, there may have been some kind of constraint around your situation. Perhaps it's come from a contractual matter, a limitation that you don't quite see the way through. But there's another part of you that really could be tempted to do something much more spontaneous. And if you are someone who loves travel and you have the opportunity to get out and experience some new sights and sounds, particularly with the Sun aligning with Neptune across the 14th to the 19th, your senses can be really stimulated, as can they be by film. If you are someone who's a bit of a buff and likes those box sets and really indulge in yourself, then this can be a month when you can really indulge yourself to your heart's desire. But also it's a month that starts off with the potential for some fortune. The Sun links brilliantly to Jupiter. So as much as something may have felt stuck and entrenched, someone can give you some shrewd advice which can unblock the logjam, and that can be pleasing. Also on the 5th, there's an exact conjunction between the North Node and Chiron. If your professional situation or your role in life has never really felt, however much effort you've put in, that it's garnered much recognition from others, there could be something that changes that around. And on the 10th, the super new moon links to Uranus, which suggests that that openness to doing things in a different way, or the desire to be more spontaneous, is also given a big boost in the following 4 weeks. On the same day, Mercury climbs to the top of your horoscope. Your ability to think in a strategic way when it comes to your professional situation will help you, and also a healthy dose of self-confidence. But Venus moves into the sign of Pisces, which it loves being in, on the 11th. You can find yourself being a bit of a truth seeker with Venus's transit through this sign this time. It forges one quite awkward alliance and one brilliant one. The awkward one is in week 3, which becomes exact on the 21st, when Venus combines with Saturn. If around a relationship there's a lack of honesty, as you see it, by the other party, that can be a little bit of a tiebreaker. Maybe is that you're going to be much more in tune with the values that are really important to you around all sorts of situations, and whether it's about finance or relationships, can be a bit sterner in your response. But from the 22nd to the 27th, Venus and Jupiter, the two planets of fortune, link in the most peerless way. This is one of the best aspects in astrology. The 20th also is great for your ambitions, as the Sun plays catch up with Mercury, and also the node and Chiron, climbing into the most prominent part of your scope, but linking as it does with Pluto. This could be a key moment if you are wanting to develop a business idea, or you are ambitious, and the changes that you attempted to make earlier in the month are more to do with your professional situation. The 22nd sees more of that when Mars thrusts its way into Pisces too. And that part of you that may have felt a little bit held back and inhibited is not going to have any more of that from here on in. You're determined to put your foot to the floor and go for that slice of freedom, or some escapism. You could find yourself much more active as this month draws to a close. The lunar eclipse is a micro moon, believe it or not, but this lunar eclipse also, like the spring equinox, links brilliantly to Pluto. What does that mean for you? Well, it does mean that whatever ambitions you've got, that part of you that is very much concerned with how things feel is really emphasized by that particular eclipse, and this is going to be the case for the next 6 months. So ambitions always need to be precluded by just checking in to check that it feels right. The last 2 days of the month start to see the alliance of Jupiter and Uranus, which will peak on the 21st of April. And again, that part of you that wants to perhaps try out some new approaches or be with different types of people is inspired. But if you want to make it all the way to the top when it comes to your professional situation, you may have to make some sacrifices around your home and emotional life on the back of that lunar eclipse. If you're someone who is trying to find that balance, then this can be a good point to try and make some adjustments and perhaps seek out some support around different elements of your situation, perhaps working more flexibly, taking certain days off, working from home on some days, getting extra support on the domestic or childcare front. These kind of questions can all come up on the back of that eclipse. But in general, there is definitely part of you that wants to shake things up this month. And even if it starts off a little bit tentatively and it isn't quite going as you wish, your determination to push through is going to be very strong. So Leo, as you make your way into March, there's a lot of energy in your 8th house, which can be to do with big changes, transformations. But one of them early on is actually potentially a bit testing. That sees the Sun very close to Saturn. It was in an exact conjunction on the 28th of February. So actually, as the days go on, the Sun's moving away from the more restrictive energies of Saturn. But ironically, the Sun forges an amazing link to Jupiter on the very first day. So there may be a little bit of a mixed bag. Perhaps there is going to be a cost that you hadn't planned, which could be a little bit disappointing, but another opportunity comes up that really excites you, and that goes through to the 4th with the Sun in that link to Jupiter. This is definitely one of the most uplifting of all aspects in astrology. Also, the North Node comes into conjunction with Chiron on the 5th exactly. We're actually pretty close together all this month. Being open-minded about information and knowledge can be very, very good. you can look at something in a different way. Someone could advise or tell you something that shapes your outlook very productively. Because you're a fixed sign, sometimes you can be a little bit adhered to what you know and what you're familiar with. So I feel you're being encouraged to be open-minded, and that's emphasised when Mercury moves on the 10th into your 9th house, but that also coincides with the super new moon. In the 8th house, that can be to do with shared resources, can be to do with where we're most invested, but the link to Uranus suggests the more open-minded you are, the better it can be. So maybe the overall theme at the early part of this month is that something that has served you well could start to fade out a little bit around finances, but something new and exciting is coming in to replace it. That can be emphasised more when on the 11th Venus moves into Pisces. It loves being in Pisces, and this too can be good for your finances, but it could be somebody close to you who has a stroke of fortune, and that in some way is good for you too. Venus moving into the 8th house can also see a relationship go from a developing alliance to something much deeper and more meaningful. Ironically and paradoxically, by week 3, as Venus links with Saturn, if you're not getting on so well with someone, whether it is romantically or financially, that will become clear on the 21st. But that's where we get the paradox again, because from the 22nd to the 27th, Venus and Jupiter forge that absolutely unparalleled positive energy. And I feel that it could be that you're going to get some kind of offer, or there's a promotion, or past effort that you've put in, perhaps around a property matter, can come back to you in a way that's unexpectedly positive. Very, very good. The 20th, the spring equinox, the sun returns to your sister fire sign of Aries, but also links magnificently to Pluto in your sector of relating. If you connect to someone through a meeting of minds, you have similar worldviews, doesn't have to be romantic. It could be a friendship, someone you do an activity with. It could be a really energized connection that comes from the spring equinox this year, but also it can give you that desire to shake things up. And if you're someone who loves traveling, then that may be something you're going to consider. However, the move of Mars into the 8th house on the 22nd is really interesting. Mars in the 8th house is very much to do with the more scorpionic energy of Mars. It's about desire. Are you really getting the type of love life you really want? That's the question Mars is going to be asking in the following 6 weeks. But the lunar eclipse, it's very much about communication, but that too links to Pluto. So I feel there's going to be a lot of chat towards the end of this month. Maybe even you're going to go on that journey, get talking to someone who you find very, very engaging. Pluto is very strong in your chart towards the end of this month. And really, I feel it's Saturn and Neptune in the earlier parts of March. So Saturn obviously can be a bit restrictive and Neptune a little bit confusing. But as this month goes on, I feel that if something hasn't worked out for you, you're in the mood to try something new, fresh and stimulating. Or if things are going well for you, you're still going to want to evolve the situation a little bit. So some growth can come from new experiences, new knowledge and new information, or being encouraged by someone who's really asking you to make the most of your talents, because there's little doubt that Pluto over the last 16 years has put a lot of focus on you sacrificing and you doing things to support others. As this month develops, I think it's about a brave new world where you can take the initiative, but it may mean that some things that you have been deeply invested in are going to make way. But as I said, there can be new exciting replacements. So Virgo, the month begins with the Sun, Mercury, your ruler, Saturn and Neptune all aligned in your sector of relating, but the Sun's pretty close to Saturn. I think what we've got at the start of this month is a huge opportunity as the Sun links to Jupiter, one of astrology's luckiest influences, and perhaps also one of astrology's more limiting ones, with the Sun's connection to Saturn, which actually peaked on the 28th of February. So maybe in your relationship situation, it won't necessarily be all hunky-dory. And I think the important thing is not to think only in terms of romance. So it could be any kind of connection, partnership, or association. Things could be a bit serious or a bit tense, or there can be a test, but there definitely can be an opportunity. Also, the midpoint at the start of this month is in your sister Earth sign of Capricorn at 10 degrees, linking to Jupiter. So 5-9, really great for being more speculative, investigating things that are exciting, trying different approaches. Also, the 5th sees an exact conjunction between the North Node and Chiron. If you are someone who's interested in the psychological dimension, that can help you to make more sense of some deep issues in that area. The supermoon, as I mentioned before, the 10th, is in your opposite sign of Pisces. But again, that Uranus link suggests an open mind, fresh approaches, or some kind of spontaneous connection could really bring some excitement in the following 4 weeks. But Mercury moves out of your sector of relation on the same day and into that 8th house. Now, if you are interested in business or you have your own desire to become more entrepreneurial, this can bring out a lot of shrewdness on your part, but also you can delve down into your financial situation with a lot of care. The 11th sees Venus replace Mercury. Now, Venus in the 7th house is one of its most positive transitions. It does tighten up into an exact conjunction with Saturn on the 21st. Again, a test around a relationship, but it's a test you can come through because Saturn can be about wisdom as much as roadblocks. Maybe you can learn something about what you're expecting in a relationship or what the other person expects and get some greater understanding going. From the 22nd through to the 29th, there's a glorious link between Venus and Jupiter. So the 2 planets of fortune could see that somebody gives you some information, or you meet someone, encounter someone in a way which is very, very lucky indeed. The spring equinox of the 20th sees the sun move into Aries, the start of the astrological year, but it's linking to Pluto in your 6th house. If you are really serious about deploying your full range of skills when it comes to managing things in a very neat, precise, detailed way, but also evolving your financial situation, you have it all with that alliance. Mars also moves into your 7th house on the 22nd. If there has been tensions and you feel that someone's wanting their way more than actually trying to find that mid ground, which is all about give and take, Mars can give you a lot more feist to stand up what you need from the situation. But if you're solo, also a lot of desire, if you'd like to meet someone, to be more interactive over the following 6 weeks. The full moon, which is a lunar eclipse, and a micro moon of the 25th, however, is a bit of a juggle between the ins and outs around your finances. Or are you going to encounter someone who has a different approach to money or even different values to you? Again, this could be at work because both are linking to Pluto in your 6th house. So what do we take of this month as a whole? Well, around relationships, I feel you could have some tense moments. If any involvement, friendship, family tie, relating with a colleague, or in a more personal context, if it's all give on your part and not a lot of get, I think Saturn can see you becoming cooler and protecting your boundaries better. On the other hand, with the Sun combining with Neptune, as it does from the 14th to the 19th, you've got to be really realistic about relationships. Saturn's asking you to keep it real, but all through the month, Uranus and Jupiter are asking you to be very open-minded about how you can move your situation forwards. That could be from travel, it could be from higher education, it could be from opening yourself up to fresh ways of approaching things. But as the month draws to a close, it does get much more about where you're most invested and also where things are transforming in your life. So it gets a bit deeper, perhaps even more psychological, but it's definitely more about finance at the end of this month. The start of the month, the first 2/3 of it much more about relationships. So Libra, as you begin this month, so the midpoint between the sun and the moon is at 10 degrees in Capricorn. So there is still that underlying theme around your emotional situation and how you feel about things, family life and where you live. But that midpoint does actually stand up in a great angle to Jupiter, the planet of growth, which is in your 8th house, which can be to do with long-term finance. So if you are looking to improve a situation, Jupiter's helpful there, and also on the first day is in a very lucky link with the Sun. Sun sextile Jupiter, which peaks on the 1st but goes on through to the 4th, is one of astrology's best influences. It just so happens that for you this time round, both the position of the Sun and Jupiter are not necessarily the sexiest locations. The Sun's in your 6th house of those practicalities I mentioned: health, work, fitness, life, order, organisation. But Jupiter's in your 8th house of those shared or longer term finances. Some good fortune could come. It could come quite spontaneously. Maybe it's going to be the payback for past hard work and application. It's just that the Sun did link with Saturn towards the end of last month. And it's possible that at the end of February, your energy wasn't the greatest, and it might not be particularly high at the start of this month. But I mentioned that nodal conjunction with Chiron. That's on the 5th. They're actually in touch with each other all this month. If you're wanting to work on just how you feel about being heard, which I think is a lot to do with relating, we don't necessarily expect that everybody is going to want to spend all their time with us, or is going to be our best friend, or wants to be in a relationship with us. But we do want to be recognised and heard. It's quite a basic human need, and yet modern society can make that difficult at times. But certainly that conjunction can be very, very positive and very healing for you if you can look at your situation in your life and your qualities in a positive way. Now, there is in week 2 a developing link between the Sun and Uranus. Sun in house 6, Uranus in 8. If you think about resources in a fresh way, or try to take some more novel approaches to unlock something that's been a bit stuck, it could pay off for you, particularly with the super new moon of the 10th, because that is very strongly linked to Uranus. So even if things are to do with, getting quite organised, decluttering, which Uranus is like space, and the 6th house is order, being a bit more virtuous in your routines, trying to find some marginal gains around your diet and exercise and fitness, that can all flow on from that particular new moon in the following month. But you may want to actually collaborate with someone else around any kind of exercise, because Mercury moves into your opposite sign on the same day. If things have been a little bit tense around communications or a bit brittle, Mercury moving into the 7th house is a great place for it to be, because we get a bit more detached, a bit more chilled out if people see things differently. But ironically, your ruler replaces Mercury on the 11th in your 6th house. What it's saying to you in this transition is you can be good and you can be sacrificing, whether it's around the domestic chores at home for family members or a partner, or you can be the person that supports people at work. But that part of your nature could be tested by the 21st as Venus aligns with Saturn. And if you do feel a bit used, your goodwill gets taken for granted, that could be something that does call out to you in week 3. But there is a paradox, because from the 22nd to the 27th, Venus forges an amazing link to Jupiter. So where you do show a little bit of sacrifice and make that extra effort, it could be richly appreciated and rewarded. Now, the Sun is going to be very close to Neptune through 14 to 19. And that is a link in the 6th house, which can see lower physical vitality. So you start the month with that potential, and then from the 14th to the 19th again, I'd conserve what energy you do have. But by the 20th, the Sun powers its way into its home start of its new journey through the sign of Aries with the spring equinox and with the start of the astrological calendar year. But for you, this is house 7, but it's linking with Pluto in house 5. This passionate alliance, well, it's just unbelievable. So the next 13 weeks can absolutely be full throttle when it comes to really trying to get from life enrichment from your passion. The 5th house can be to do with speculation, being a little bit more risk-taking where Pluto is. Of course, it can be to do with love and romance. The 7th house is where we relate to others, and that spring equinox also links brilliantly to the moon in Leo, which of course is very positive for you because that's your friendship sector. So there's a lot to like about that spring equinox. It's really going to move you forwards from the more practical dimension of earlier in the month into a much more playful and interactive one. Now, the 22nd does see Mars move out of your 5th house, where it is great for feeling good about ourselves and feeling alluring and attractive. But moving into the sign of Pisces, it's not its best transit, but for you, house 6 can actually see Mars give you more vitality. So the energy that Saturn and Neptune drain on the Sun at the start of the month, from the 14th to the 19th, can actually see you get more vitality and spark going from the 22nd. But then we have the lunar eclipse, the micro moon, in your sign on the 25th. And of course, as usual, it's about relationships. If you're feeling unfulfilled, this is a mighty boost because Pluto aligns to both the moon and the sun. It's a trine to your moon and a sextile to the sun. So what's Pluto saying? Well, I feel Pluto in the 5th house is about desire. So you're wanting to feel enriched, much more satisfied. And because of that conjunction between the North Node and Chiron, which is really the backdrop story of the month, all the sacrifice that 6th house energy can see you put in, it really could get to a breaking point if you just still feel that whatever you do, it's never recognized, never appreciated. You really could become much more feisty towards the end of this month and much more assertive in letting people know how you feel about things. That's your cardinal energy, leader. And when you really do get dissatisfied, you can represent the energy of your opposite sign of Aries a lot more than people realise. The last 2 days of this month do see a conjunction developing within 3 degrees between Jupiter and Uranus, which peaks on the 21st of April. If you are someone who's very open to technology or new approaches, open-minded, and want to transform your life in some kind of powerful way, you're certainly going to have an opportunity with the thrust of this eclipse at the end of this March Libra. So Scorpio, as you make your way into this new month, so the Sun, Mercury, Saturn and Neptune are all in the 5th house. 5th house is about social interaction. It can be about where we demonstrate our individuality. It can be very warm, affectionate, playful. It can be to do with children if you have them. But most of all, it can be where we just want to be radiant. The problem is having Saturn there can counter that desire for radiance. And ironically, Saturn is pretty close to the Sun as you start this month. In fact, as February came to a close, Saturn squeezed the Sun, and there may have been a somber moment around your love life or around your social situation, which you're still trying to work out as you come into this month. The great news, however, is the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, which is a critical degree in astrology. The balance of the energy we can expect this month is in Capricorn at 10 degrees. But that links brilliantly to Jupiter in your sector of relating. And for you, Capricorn is the 3rd house. So that's your thinking, how you choose your words, how you express yourself. But it can also be where you're quite fluid and quick thinking, and the conversations you have with people in your everyday world. But that angle to Jupiter suggests that some connection this month could prove to be really very productive, even lucky. Furthermore, the Sun on the 1st is in an exact sextile with Jupiter, one of the best alliances that you can get in astrology. If we want to think of astrology in terms of fortune, that's about as good as it gets, really. So if you are someone who's interested in meeting someone new, that's very helpful. It's just the sun being close to Saturn suggests that whatever or whoever you may be attracted to, whether it's an idea or a hobby or a talent that you want to take forwards, or it is around a social interaction or someone you're attracted to, don't be overconfident, because the sun in that sextile to Jupiter can kid us into thinking that everything will work perfectly, where Saturn's saying just keep a little bit back. But then you know that better than most signs, because you generally approach things with a great deal of shrewdness. That said, on the 5th we do have a nodal conjunction with Chiron in the 6th house. If you have been encountering any kind of health problems, you may get some inspiration from something you read or someone's experience or advice, or just start to feel different. There may be an uplift. Also in week 2, the sun's developing angle to Uranus in your sector of relating is an exciting aspect. Uranus has been perhaps a little bit challenging at times over the last 6 years. There may have been some stops and starts around your relationships. Maybe things have been exciting one minute, distance the next, a bit maybe unpredictable. But this is like the alliance is really good, and it feeds into the super new moon of the 10th. So the following month can also be pretty lucky for you if you're open-minded about who you can connect to. Mercury moves, however, on the 10th into the sign of Aries, which, like your sign, is traditionally ruled in totality by Mars. So Mercury moving into the 6th house, if you have been generating some good ideas, Mercury can start to thread it all together, the details, to try to make it work. But the 11th, Venus moving into house 5, that's passion, it's warmth, very sociable. And it is going to go on to forge one of the most prestigious links possible from the 22nd to the 27th with Jupiter. So, that can point towards some real serendipity. But at the same time, Venus is also approaching Saturn, and that becomes exact on the 21st. It's one of those aspects that can have a number of outcomes. For example, if you're in a romantic relationship where you don't feel that you can have much fun and enjoyment, Venus's conjunction with Saturn might be the time that you decide to call it quits. On the other hand, it could be when you decide that someone's worthy of investing more in, so it becomes a more long-lasting and stable relationship. So it has some different strands. Also, Venus combined into Saturn could see you using your creative talents in a more structured way. But that link between Venus and Jupiter, up there with the Sun and Jupiter in terms of good fortune. The 20th brings to an end a few days when the Sun is aligning with Neptune. That period of days from the 14th to the 19th, maybe your energy is going to be a bit lower, but also you can be much more sensitive. But what's critical with that is to use the sensitivity, not ignore it. So if your instincts are informing you of something, then do listen to them. The 20th, the spring equinox. And this is really a very, very unique event, because this marks the start of the astrological year. Western tropical astrology is governed by the seasons, not by the Gregorian calendar or the lunar calendar. And so what we have is the start of Cardinal Quadrant 1, lasting 13 weeks. But it links to your modern ruler of Pluto in the 4th house. Some big changes could be coming for you in the next 13 weeks, and perhaps it is to do with where you live and how you live there. But also on the 22nd, your traditional ruler moves to join with Venus in that very playful 5th house. So it's an interesting month. I feel that there can be an opportunity to enjoy yourself, but maybe with a purpose. And certainly the latter part of the month, more practical strands take centre stage. The lunar eclipse, the micromoon of the 25th, occurs in your 12th house, but is also linking to Pluto. 12th, 6th energy, interesting. When it comes to your professional situation, just be conscious of office politics. Sometimes the way these things work, we're not told what's going on. So if someone's, being a bit two-faced or cunning, a bit Machiavellian behind your back, that could be flagged up by this particular lunar eclipse, I'm afraid. So over the next 6 months, it's very important that you are aware of those potentials, but also in a more practical sense, I think that what that lunar eclipse is saying to you is, are you at peace with the balance between your physical and everyday health and structures with the more psychological and emotional side of your health? If you're someone who has a very holistic approach, you're very much interested in healing, nurture, peacefulness, and also personal development, then this lunar eclipse doesn't really hold too many fears, to be honest. But if you're someone who's very much in the physical world and tends to think that all that emotional stuff is for others, then it could be more challenging for you over the next 6 months. And there may be things that you will encounter that could change your outlook somewhat. There is, in the last 2 days, a link between Jupiter and Uranus, which will become exact on the 21st of April. Some kind of exciting connection, conversation, which really can be very, very stimulating. There's a lot of fun to be had this month, Scorpio. It is asking you in the latter part of the month to take life and its more everyday routines a bit more seriously, which does sound a bit dull, sorry. But having said that, you're still going to retain Jupiter until the 26th of May in the 7th house of relating, along with Uranus, which is really good. And you've still got Venus and Mars in very, very positive areas as this month comes to a close. So even around the everyday stuff, you can still make it enjoyable. But I just think it is important to watch those politics and try to approach your overall health in a holistic way as possible. So Sagittarius, as March begins, the Sun, Mercury, Saturn and Neptune all lined up in the 4th house. 4th house is how we feel about things. It's about our approach to security, physical or emotional. It's about where we live, how we live there, family relationships, and obviously a very important part of our situations. But it's also exactly a year since Saturn entered this area on March the 7th last year. And ironically, as you start this new month, the Sun is actually very close to Saturn. They were in exact conjunction on the 28th of February, so it's just inching away. But there may be something around that home or emotional life that does feel a bit restrained, maybe a bit limited. Perhaps it's a space issue, perhaps it's more to do with atmosphere. Maybe someone in your family needs your support. Perhaps you're not living quite where you want to be. Perhaps just in terms of your state of mind, you may feel a little bit lower in emotional energy. But the fact that Jupiter, your ruler, is linking so positively with the Sun and therefore with Saturn does provide the potential for some levitation. And what Jupiter is saying in your 6th house is that if you can get more organised or accept some of those limitations and work with them and try to be as productive as possible, it can create some extra flow, which will be good for you. The midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, a critical degree in astrology at the start of this month, and therefore influential for the whole month, is at 10 degrees in Capricorn. So that too links well to Jupiter. And for you, Capricorn is the 2nd house of money. So if you can be a bit more ordered, a bit more efficient, accept some of those constraints, things can start to improve around the finance. Also, a lovely combination between the North Node, which is our direction of travel collectively in terms of transits, obviously where it is in your natal chart is a big indicator on what your overall aims will be in life. So if it's in house 1, you need to be individualistic. In the 7th house, it's going to be a big thing to be in positive relationships and so on. So having it in your 5th house, combining with Chiron, pretty close all month, but exact on the 5th, can be great if you want to develop creativity and flair within those more practical parameters. Week 2 sees the sun start to link positively with Uranus. Your emotional and home life can change. It doesn't have to be disruptive. Uranus probably has been disruptive at times over the last 6 years. Perhaps things have been very unpredictable when it comes to your work, or maybe you've had roles where you feel you've been sacrificing, but at the same time, it's meant you've lost a little bit of, as you see it, your individual sparkle. But actually, you've probably been really richly appreciated. All this builds up to the super new moon of the 10th, which pretty close to the angle to Uranus as well, but sees Mercury then go into your 5th house and your sister fire sign of Aries. So Mercury isn't particularly happy in the 4th house, particularly in Pisces. That's 2 particularities. But Mercury in Pisces is in detriment, and the water doesn't agree with its need for logic and detachment, and obviously to communicate clearly. So Mercury moving into the fire sign of Aries brings some spark, some oxygen into the mix, but also some extra gusto and creativity. You're going to feel that your emotions are going less round and round, and you can outlet them. Whereas Venus, that replaces Mercury in Pisces, loves being in Pisces, and Venus in the 4th house is great for anything decorative, if you're wanting to refurnish in some ways. A lovely link, you know, if you're in the northern hemisphere, this could be an opportunity to start reshaping your outdoor space, you know, getting in the garden and getting that first spring air. But Venus in the 4th house can also be lovely to get together with family members. It does forge an exact conjunction with Saturn on the 21st. It's an interesting aspect, this. It has its up and it has its downside. It could mean that you feel a bit cooler about someone in your family, or someone can seem a bit distant to you, but it can also be a nice balance between being practical and creative around your desire in terms of the decorative side of things. But Venus actually forges a fantastic link with Jupiter across the 22nd to the 27th, which really can mean that something around your home or emotional life, some really good news is possible. Now the Sun is very close to Neptune through 14 to 19. Your emotional energy could be a bit lower and you could be more sensitive, but the 20th sees the Sun power into the sign of Aries, the sister fire sign, and of course connecting up with Mercury, the node, and Chiron. So the 5th house is really rock and roll. It's much more to do with speculation, it's much more outgoing, it can be fun, it can be sociable, and because of the fire element, it's really igniting you and your passions beautifully. It also links to Pluto in your 3rd house. So this is a new experience, and fantastic, you know, because this hasn't happened for many years. So what we've got here is an opportunity to use the passion of Pluto in terms of expressing your ideas and the joyfulness that can come from the 5th house. So I feel you're going to really sense a transformation. It is true that Mars joins up with Venus on the 22nd in your 4th house. Mars in the 4th house can be a bit prickly, a bit grumpy, a bit reactive. It's rather like Cancer. And Mars in Pisces can be a bit subjective. But I feel that if you're wanting to make some changes to where you live, whether it is you know, some do-it-yourself jobs, or you want to remodel your kitchen or your bathroom, Mars gives you a lot more thrust and urgency to achieve that. But the 25th sees the lunar eclipse. The micro moon, this lunar eclipse is in Libra, which for you is a very friendly location. So the next 6 months, finding the balance between what you want in terms of your longer term future, the position of the moon, in terms of what other people want from you immediately, or where you get what you need individually, is in the sign of Aries, but Pluto's informing them. So it's going to be a lot of conversation, a lot more interaction socially in the next 9 months of this year, because remember, we've got the solar eclipse of the 8th, which is a total solar eclipse, but also a supermoon. And then we have the solar eclipse of the 2nd of October also in a very sociable part of your situation. So the total eclipse, 5th house, brilliant for expressing your individuality. The Libra eclipse, very much about your connections to others. So you're just being asked really to start sorting out where you're going to invest your loyalties and your energy and your time. But because Pluto's in the mix, it can give you a lot to think about, but maybe a greater desire to communicate how you feel about where you can showcase your individual talents and flair. So I think actually a really positive eclipse. And then the last 2 days of the month, Jupiter, and Uranus start to close up. They're going to come into an exact conjunction on the 21st of April, but they're actually going to be within 3 degrees right through to the around about the 7th of May, I think. So if you haven't quite found that job that you want, or the structure in your life that really works for you, because after all, you love the big picture, and where Uranus and Jupiter are is very much about the small picture, but making it work for you. But having your ruler in the mix gives you a fighting chance, and he's there through to the 26th of May. So use that energy. And if you have felt that your structures have constantly been tested and there's been a lot of tension, yes, the emotional side of your situation comes to the fore at the early part of this month. Well, I think you're running on full power by the time you get to that spring equinox. Really exciting stuff for you, Sagittarius. So Capricorn, as you make your way into March, you're supported by that glorious midpoint in your sign. But you also have 4 planets, if we include the Sun, which is technically a luminary, are in the sign of Pisces, which is about chit-chat, everyday exchange of ideas. It's kind of a bit Gemini-like. But one of the planets there is Mercury, so that has an added incentive about communication, but it's not at its best in the sign of Pisces, to be honest. It's detrimented, so you do need to think about what you're going to say carefully. But Saturn, your ruler, is going to help. If you recall, as the month came to an end in February on the 28th, the Sun and Saturn were in a tight conjunction. There may be something that you're still thinking very carefully about, ruminating as you come into this month, which could be giving you a lot of food for thought. And you may be a little bit unsure about how to proceed. It may even be just simply thinking about a new mode of transport, perhaps learning some new skills, perhaps thinking about upgrading your tech. But Saturn's just slowing the Sun down a little bit. But Jupiter applies to the Sun as well as that midpoint. So in fact, at the start of this month, even though Saturn's saying don't rush anything, consider all the options, which is the core of your being, there is an opportunity there if it feels right to take decisive action. But as much as those conversations can be important at the start of this month, in fact through the first 2/3, there is an important emotional point which occurs on the 5th. This is when the retreating North Node meets with Chiron. Chiron is very much in the 4th house for you, about feelings. And people with Chiron in their 4th house tend to be very skilled at listening to other people's needs, but sometimes can feel that other people are not so attuned to them. You may encounter a situation where someone just spontaneously shares their life story, but doesn't necessarily ask you how you feel. And that could be a little bit hard to take. But in a more positive sense, perhaps someone will be willing to give you the space and the time to share something that is of a more sensitive nature. Now, as week 2 evolves, so the Sun starts to link with the sometimes disruptive Uranus, but in this angle, potentially very helpful angle of Uranus. Uranus is in your 5th house along with Jupiter. This is the part of your scope where you can be sparkling, charismatic, and radiate your talent, your warmth, and your personality. And essentially, now the Sun's shrugged off the more restrictive energies of Saturn, it's saying if you've got ideas, don't hold back on this particular super new moon, which manifests on the 10th, from showcasing them over the following month. Also, Mercury moves out of Pisces and into Aries on the same day. Now, Mercury in the 4th house is not a great fit, but Mercury in Aries brings in that fire, that oxygen. So if there is something you want to say that is more personal, that's more to do with your own feelings, then Mercury can help you, along with that super new moon and Uranus, to ventilate what's important to you. Now, from the 14th to the 19th, the Sun goes alongside Neptune. This can give you a lot of subtlety in the way you express your ideas, but it could also see you feeling a bit lower in vitality. Maybe also feeling quite sensitive. You may hear something, someone may say something that just seems to get right into you, perhaps even a little uncharacteristically. If there are people around you in your community or on your online connections that tend to be a little bit draining, even if unintentionally, you might just want to shield yourself a little bit. Venus moves on the 11th into Pisces and then approaches Saturn by the 21st when they merge. If you do want to say something very sincere to someone and you feel that perhaps they haven't quite been listening, what you can do here is articulate yourself with a degree of diplomacy, Venus, but also find the right structure or the tone to actually get them to take notice of what you have to say. But it could also be a little bit of a tense moment. There may be someone you're fond of who says something that just jolts on your senses a little bit. So maybe you're going to experience that. But in a more creative sense, Venus forges a superb link with Jupiter. This goes on from the 22nd to the 27th. Now, this 5-day period can be truly fortunate. These are the two planets of serendipity in traditional astrology. So that can be lucky for you. And then on the 20th, we have that spring equinox. It's very important in terms of astrology. This is because the Sun returning to the sign of Aries starts its journey all over again. It's the start of the astrological new year. And this year on the 20th, it's forging a nice angle to the moon in Leo. So a lot of fire, but critically forges a link to Pluto. So this is the first time any of us would have experienced this energy. This new beginning, therefore, can be a sense that something's shifting in humanity in quite a major way. And because Pluto's been making its way through your sign for such a long time, the world has felt very Capricornian. It's been very much about hard work, industry, but at times the focus more on the material plane. So with Pluto now in Aquarius for your second house, you could be finding yourself thinking more about how you can earn money, but also how you can value yourself. The spring equinox is emphasizing your emotions, your inner relationship, just like the North Node and that connection with Chiron did on the 5th. But then Mars hustles and bustles its way out of Aquarius, your second house, joining up with Venus in the sign of Pisces. So if there is something you still want to, a point you want to get across that you feel has not perhaps hit the mark, Mars will certainly give you more gusto and a little more urgency. But then we have that full moon, that lunar eclipse, the micro moon of the 25th. Over the next 6 months, if there is something out of kilter between your public facing persona and your work role and what you're really needing in terms of nurture at home and emotion and family, there could need to be some kind of a realignment. And to be honest, it could be to do with money. So the amount of time you're working against the amount of time you want to spend pursuing the things that give you a sense of enrichment in your inner world may be something you have to toggle. But by the end of the month, Jupiter and Uranus are beginning to close together within 3 degrees. That's going to become a conjunction on the 21st of April, once more showcasing the way that you can look at things in a fresh, different and imaginative way. You have a reputation of being very solid, very reliable, hardworking, someone who very often is in a position of influence or responsibility. But that combination is asking you to perhaps just get in touch with the more flamboyant side of your nature, be a little bit more risk-taking. If there's part of your life that isn't really ignited and giving you a sense of enrichment in terms of passion, and I'm not talking about romantically, I'm just talking about your interests, your hobbies, your friendships, your social world, it may be time to review things in a really fresh way. And this is going to be the start of the process. So I think there's going to be a lot of thinking this month, Capricorn, a lot of discussion. And it is, as the month goes on, going to go a little more inward, more into your emotions. But the more you can listen to your senses and your inner voice, the more that can guide that more flamboyant potential in the fifth house, and essentially where you feel most comfortable, whether it's with the company you keep, the interests you have, or the job you want, where you feel most comfortable is where your attention should be going by the month's end. So Aquarius, as you make your way into March, the Sun, Mercury, Saturn and Neptune are all lined up in the sign of Pisces. Pisces is a mutable sign, so it's very flexing, it's watery, can be very emotional, can be quite psychological, but for you this represents house 2. So that's the foundational part of life. Can be our self-worth, it can be our values, and critically it can be everyday money. But if you recall, last year on March the 7th, Saturn, your traditional ruler, moved into Pisces. And ever since then, Saturn has probably been influencing your view of all those areas, particularly if you're born more towards the beginning of Aquarius. Now, as February came to a close on the 28th, the Sun and Saturn connected exactly in a conjunction. This may have been a time when you really were thinking about those areas very seriously, or there may have been some blockage or inhibition or some kind of frustration. And there could be a sense of that as you enter this new month. But Jupiter, the planet of fortune, does provide some levitation right from the first day. It's linking magnificently to the Sun and also to Saturn, but also it's linking to the midpoint, which at the start of this month, that's the critical degree between the Sun and the Moon at 10 degrees in Capricorn. So the stuff you've been doing behind the scenes for a long time, dedication, investment, research, sacrifice, perhaps at times feeling very underappreciated, can come back to you in a way which is good for you emotionally, but it can start to see dividends financially. And in fact, it's all, I feel, a lot to do with your ability to communicate, which is often a great strength of yours. But the retreat in North Node meets Chiron, and this is on the 5th, but they're actually within 3 degrees for the whole of this month. This can be a month when you regain a lot of confidence around your ideas and the expression of them. And then in week 2, your modern ruler starts to connect Uranus with the Sun, and that feeds into the super new moon of the 10th, which also coincides with Mercury leaving the sign of Pisces and moving into the fiery sign of Aries. That's going to be a critical day because on the 11th, then followed by the 22nd, Venus and Mars move into the sign of Pisces. And if you have been finding some parts of your foundation or some parts of your self-worth or some parts of your financial situation have come under pressure over the last year, but you've really dug in and shown a lot of resourcefulness, and perhaps also been very flexible and adapted, particularly around where you live, how you live there, how you work there, the rewards can come from the 11th. So it may seem it's all to do with the new moon, and it can in part be to do with that, but I think it's going to be Venus on the 11th which really starts to engender an improvement in your situation. But there is a little bit of a gotcha, because as much as Venus can bring a new sense of rewards and a new sense of security into your situation, by the 21st, Venus is connecting to Saturn too. So it's kind of saying to you, be careful that you don't splash any new money that comes in too freely, because you could end up with a case of buyer's remorse. Also, it's possible that in a personal relationship, your attitude or values may clash with someone you're closely involved with. Despite that, the Sun aligns with Neptune from the 14th to the 19th. And if you are someone who enjoys a little bit of escapism, perhaps a nice glass of wine or a lovely film or a walk in nature, all of those things can be brilliant, and you could really trip the light fantastic across those days. But it's not the best of times to have too much sugar and basically overindulge, because your system probably won't appreciate it. And part of the reason for that is from the 22nd to the 27th, Venus and Jupiter forging an amazing link. But then if you feel in the mood to celebrate, it's going to be hard not doing it to the nth degree. But that brings us to the 20th, and the most stunning moment. The spring equinox this year not just ushers the Sun into the sign of Aries, it also is the start of the astrological calendar, and it brings in cardinal quadrant 1, the first 13-week segment of the year. So it's about new beginnings for us all, for sure. But for you, this is house 3. And that revival that I feel was nurtured by the North Node and Chiron becomes, and then also with Mercury moving on the 10th into Aries, becomes like furnace-like on the 20th, when that spring equinox, the Sun into Aries, links with Pluto in your sign. And if you are born at the start of Aries, this is really, really going to be very momentous. It's going to bring a lot of extra self-belief in, and a lot of conviction, potentially a lot of persuasion, and people are going to find you very hard to ignore. You know, whatever politics you might be caught up with in your work or a relationship, you're developing a greater authority. Also on that event, there's a brilliant link to the moon in Leo in your house of relating. So the moon in the 7th house can be very lucky. So the next 13 weeks for you in particular can bring some real good fortune. That brings us to the 22nd. Mars moves out of your sign, joins up with Venus. So to have Venus and Mars in your second house is also going to give you an appreciation of sensuality. The second house is very Tauran. So good food, good wine, perhaps splashing out on a few things that really take your fancy may be hard to resist if the finances are reviving. But the lunar eclipse, which occurs on the 25th, the micromoon, also links into Pluto in your sign. And that's very much about communication. The thing with communication, it's easy to say things, particularly for air signs, like obviously Gemini, Libra and Aquarius. The important thing is to say it with purpose, to have a meaning there. And one of the keys with Pluto, therefore, is it's really encouraging all Aquarius people, myself included, to really speak from the heart and really express deeply held views. Not in a way which dominates other people, but just in a way that means you're standing up what is important to you, in a way that perhaps with Pluto going through the 12th house, you may have withdrawn a little bit from interacting at times, because it just seemed to be too much hassle. People may not have been very receptive, blah de blah. But now there is a glorious chance in this particular event over the next 6 months to express your emotional feeling with conviction, with a degree of delicacy, but most of all with sincerity. So your interactions with people are going to be very powerful. It could see you traveling. It may see you expanding your world quite a bit, making a lot of new contacts. If you are involved in publishing or writing or websites or any kind of media work, you're really going to be very, very busy, and it's going to be an extremely exciting time. But if none of that fits for you, for sure, even within your local community, things are going to become a lot livelier and more interactive. So this month may start off with a bit of a sticky moment. You may be a little bit concerned how things are going to evolve around your resources, but there is some real good news coming in as the month goes on. So Pisces, as you make your way into March, the Sun, Mercury, the planet of communication, Saturn and Neptune are all in your sign. Very much Pisces season. Think back a year ago though, Saturn had only just arrived on March the 7th in the sign of Pisces. What have you experienced in that time? What's changed? What Saturn in the first house often does is provide a little bit less energy, but the energy we do have, we have to focus in a very narrow and precise way on the things that are really important. So it's asked you to strip down your world a little bit and focus on what's really essential. But as you start this new month, the midpoint, a critical degree in astrology between the Sun and the Moon, is at 10 degrees in Capricorn, which for you is very friendly. It's very much to do with your future, but it's forging an amazing link with your traditional ruler of Jupiter. So there is a sense that your thinking can be really inspired right at the start of March. And even if your physical vitality has been a little low, particularly when the Sun applied to Saturn on the 28th of February, as you make your way into the new month, Jupiter also links to the Sun and Saturn in your sign. So you get some uplift from Jupiter in two different ways. Also on the 5th, a fantastic link between the North Node and Chiron. If you've ever struggled in some way to really feel that you're worthwhile, or you found that your appreciation of life is very dependent on how much money you have behind you, it could be that Chiron has had an impact on you in that way. Certainly in terms of your overall zodiac sign, Chiron in Aries has been asking you to work on your sense of self-worth. But the link between the North Node and Chiron could be good for your bank balance, and there could be more good news coming later in the month. But from week 2, the Sun starts to interact with the innovative and electric energies of Uranus. But because the Sun is in your sign, you probably have to take the initiative. Sometimes you're someone who's very, very supportive to others. Yours is the 12th zodiac sign. It's the sign of culmination in the spiritual sense, because it's where the Sun's coming to the end of its journey before reigniting the beginning of its journey, which of course happens with the spring equinox. And this March, it's on the 20th of March, and the Sun returns to the start of the journey. So it can be a reflective sign, Pisces. So what you're needing to do this month is seize the moment. And that's why Venus pitching up on the 11th and Mars on the 22nd are so important, because obviously with Saturn there, at times it may feel that you're having to push a boulder up the hill. It may not feel that things are developing at the pace you want. It may feel that you're having to rationalize your life to such a degree and you don't really have a lot of energy or physical vitality to achieve what you want. So therefore, the super new moon of the 10th, and it's linked to the sparkling energy of Uranus, is saying you have to take the lead. It's not about being supportive to others. You know, you can be a fantastic asset in terms of psychological care, medical support, spiritual or healing environments. Very often many psychics have a lot of 12th house or Pisces. So those instinctive energies are important, but now you're being asked to take a firm grip on your life direction and go with it quickly with Uranus's lightning hell. Don't think too much. Mercury moves into your second house on the 10th too. That could be good for your finances, but Venus moving into your sign on the 11th is going to be good in terms of your relationship situation, because since Pluto moved into your 12th house on the 21st of January, you may have been asking yourself some serious questions about who you can really rely upon, who's trustworthy, who's really got your back. And there may have been some disappointments. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's been any kind of dramatic falling out. There may have been a drift in certain relationships, or a sense that there's some kind of disorientation and uncertainty about who's really staying in touch with you, or perhaps you've just felt more reticent and distant. So Venus moving into your sign brings you into the moment. If there has been a separation in a relationship, this can be a line in the sand, but also it's a great time to give yourself a glamorous new makeover. So Venus moving into your sign along with the new moon is very auspicious indeed. But doesn't necessarily mean that you can rush anything. Venus does align with Saturn on the 21st. If you were thinking about having any kind of procedure to do with beauty and looks, probably not the best date, the 21st, to be really honest. Not the best dates to go and see a new hairdresser that you don't know, that doesn't know when to stop snipping. I've had that a few times. But seriously, Venus does start to build an alliance with Jupiter from the 22nd to the 27th, which could be extraordinarily beneficial to you. And you can enjoy some very flirty but uplifting conversations. Now, the Sun is going to align with your other ruler of Neptune from the 14th to the 19th. Energy may drop off a little bit. Don't worry. You could feel a little bit more sensitive to the atmosphere. Remember, this part of the month, you're being asked to really focus on what's important to you and not be distracted by other people too much. But then on the 20th, we have that spring equinox. The Sun moves to Aries, and you can start to really think, look, I'm achieving things here. I'm making progress. I'm creating some new foundations for myself. And Mars hustling into your sign on the 22nd is going to bring a lot of vitality. So if you have felt at times, particularly towards the end of February, a little bit low in vibe, mood, and just drive, it wouldn't be a surprise. So it's definitely going to be coming back as this month goes on. But that spring equinox also forges a link with Pluto. And because it's the second house, the Sun moving into Aries, and Pluto is in the 12th, it's asking you to analyse where you get value in your life. Now, often it is by being a giver. But sometimes if we give so much to others, we can end up feeling empty. And it's that old adage, you can't pour from an empty jug. So be aware of that, because what the Sun moving into Aries is asking you to do is really get your foundations right for you personally. And because the lunar eclipse on the 25th is accenting the two axes across your 2nd and 8th house, with the eclipse in the 8th, just driving yourself into the ground to earn money because that feels the right thing to do. But if you're doing too much, you're burning yourself out, is not valuable. So Pluto feeds into the lunar eclipse as well. So Pluto is asking you to understand much more why you often end up in very psychological support roles. Is it in some ways because of your sense of worth? And that takes us back to that connection between the North Node and also Chiron. Now, by the end of the month, Jupiter and Uranus start to edge closer together for the last couple of days. Going to become exact on the 21st of April, goes on into early May. A glittering combination which hasn't happened for 14 years. And for you, it's very much about your ideas. But you can see your ideas have to feed into your sense of self-worth, but not necessarily only into earning more money, because the Sun going into that second house, and obviously the eclipse on the 8th, can see you trying to bring more revenue in to make you feel more secure. Totally understandable, but not if you're burning the midnight oil doing lots of support work that doesn't really help you to showcase your individuality. So there's the themes for this month. It's very important that you take your talent, flair, and artistry and personality powers seriously. This is your time. It is starting some things off. There could be, if you've had a breakup in a relationship, a completely new beginning with Venus and Mars in your sign, where you give yourself some kind of reset. But the reset can be about coming into your power and not just be so sacrificing, which is a very Piscean trait. And Then, as the month goes on, starting to value what you do for others, not just in material terms. And that's really the lesson that Pluto's asking you to embrace. But you can still have some fantastic ideas this month, some great conversations, particularly with Venus and Jupiter in that lovely sextile. It could be that if you're an artistic or creative Pisces, some kind of outlet or opportunity is going to evolve for you that really gives you a major lift.